Hey everybody, it's Adam back again for another tutorial from the Army Painter. Today we're going to be painting up a really cool model from our friends at Wargames Exclusive, the Vindilorian, an obvious take on the Star Wars franchise's Mandalorian character. Now I think it's called a Vindilorian because it's meant to be a counts as Vindicare Assassin for Warhammer 40k, but I think this is a great collector's item, could be used in your Star Wars Legion games as well. So let's get right to it. Now we are going to be using some colors that weren't featured on that list. These are new prototype metallic colors that we're working on here at headquarters, and I'm really excited to show them to you. You get to hear a little bit about the names that we're going to be calling them, and we'd love to get your feedback on them. But with every tutorial that we do here at the Army Painter, it starts with a color primer spray. I started with Skeleton Bone because I thought it might be a versatile color to use for all of the different colors that we're going to be applying to this Vindilorian model. But you could start with something like Chaotic Red, Dragon Red, or Pure Red for those red armor tones. I've given the model an all-over prime in Color Primer Skeleton Bone. This is going to be a great starting point for some of those bony armor areas on our Vindilorian, and also for some of the browns, reds, and other colors that we are going to paint. The first step that we're going to begin applying is Oak Brown, and we're just going to apply this all over the cape. Very thin coat. I am using my regiment brush. And don't worry at this point if you get it on other areas of the model. You do want to be as tidy as possible. We can always go back and clean them up a bit later because our Skeleton Bone color primer is a 100% match to our war paint of the same name. So just take your time and apply 2 thin coats. You want to water this down with some clean water. Make sure that you don't get any of the brush marks, streak marks on the model or obscure any of the detail. I've mixed in a little bit of our Oak Brown and Crusted Sword to give us kind of a reddish, purplish brown tone. And I'm just going to begin stippling this onto the cape very gently here with our Masterclass dry brush. Now the Vindilorian obviously is a model meant to replicate and simulate the Mandalorian from the hit television show and the Star Wars franchise. And if you look at some of the images of the Mandalorian, is what I did for reference, you can see that the cape is almost got a reddish tone to it, and it also has a bit of texture to it. And we're just trying to replicate the texture of his cape using this stippling technique. So I'm just very lightly, very gently applying a bit of this stipple coat to the cape just to give it a little bit of texture. Now with that stippling technique dry, I'm taking a bit of our dark tone wash and I'm going to apply this all over the cape. Now you want to allow it to work its way into the recesses. Now we do have some pretty flat panels, so just carefully you want to pull this across just to tone it down a little bit and almost act as a glaze. But here on areas like these creases and crevices in the cape, these folds of the cape, you do want to allow that wash to settle in there. Now if it does begin to pull a little bit too much, as you can see here, you just take the tip of your brush and go ahead and move it away. Now that we've allowed the wash some time to dry, I'm going back to that mix, that 50-50 mix of our Oak Brown and Crusted Sword, and I'm just going to begin highlighting the creased edges on the cape. Now, areas like here, I'm just taking the side of my brush and I'm just tracing that side along the edge. Now, in other areas like here, you are going to want to be careful and just paint and trace in that highlight with the tip of your brush. On areas like here, these holes in the cape, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to apply a highlight just around the outside. It's okay if this is, I like to call them chunkier highlights. If this is a little bit bigger, a little bit looser, we are going to come back and add a more refined highlight in later steps. So very simply just go around all the edges and the folds in the cape with that 50-50 mix and go ahead and begin highlighting this cape on our Vindilorian. Now with just a bit of the pure Crusted Sword, we're going to go and refine those highlights very carefully, a very thin line. And now you see that kind of purplish reddish start to take shape. It is a brown cape that just kind of leans towards red. And what we're doing is we're leaning into those red tones now with this highlight. You're going to be pretty conservative with your application of this highlight. You don't want to paint all of the edges, but just the most raised areas of the cape, like so. Like here on this back fold on the cape, you see I'm going just about 3/4 of the way up. And same on this large fold here. And don't forget to get the bottoms, about the bottom third, 2/3 of the rips and tears in the cape. Now with a bit of Grimoire Purple. Now this is a slightly pinkish gray tone. I'm going to begin just picking out the very fine and edge highlights on the model, like the very tip here. And this little tip of the fold here. If our last highlight was a conservative highlight, this is even more so. We just want to focus on the most extreme areas on the cape. So we'll finish around going all over the folds of the cape, picking out the most raised areas with Grimoire Purple. And that'll be it for our Vindilorian's cape. All right, and now our cape is complete. We're going to move on to painting all of the body armor and cloth on our Vindilorian. So before we get to the armor plating, we got to get the suit that he's wearing underneath. And for this, we're starting with Cultist Robe. And we're just going to apply this to all of the areas underneath the model. So basically his shirt and pants. Now that we have all of the clothing on the model based in our Cultist Robe, we're going to go ahead and apply a coat of Quickshade Dark Tone just to bring out those recesses and bring that greenish gray back to kind of its grayish roots. The Dark Tone will help to do that by adding the black pigments into the recesses on the model. So just go around, find all of the areas that we previously painted in Cultist Robe and apply a wash, just one single coat. If it does begin to pull up a little bit too much, just go ahead and wick it away like I did right there. All right, so we've allowed our wash to dry and we're going to go right back to our Cultist Robe. We're just going to pick out the raised areas like here on his abdominal muscles. Leave that Quickshade Dark Tone in the recesses. And the pectoral muscles here, very easy. We're painting by numbers now. That wash step really helped to bring out the details, and it's going to be our guiding light to show us where to place our highlights on the model. So like here on the back bicep, you're just going to want to reapply some of that Cultist Robe to the raised areas. Here on the fingers, just go ahead and pick out the knuckles on the fingers and the palm. And then on these folds on his pants here, just very gently leave that wash in the recesses. I've mixed in a little bit of Filthy Cape with my Cultist Robe, and I'm just going to pick out the most extreme raised areas on the model. And the reason I like to mix in before I apply a final highlight is this is going to be just a more subtle gradation from our first highlight to our most extreme. And it just allows you to kind of get a good sense of where you should place your highlights and your most extreme highlights on the model. For example, here on the bicep, I would focus on the outside and bottom portion of this musculature. I'm using very thin down paint so I can just lightly brush it on, just very simply. I'm really seeing that gray start to take shape. We're moving away from that greenish gray of Cultist Robe into a more pure gray. Now Filthy Cape, it does have a slight greenish hue to it, and that's why I selected it for this. I think it's a natural highlight choice for Cultist Robe. However, you could pick any color gray, any color light gray. Ash gray would be just fine. And if you wanted to work in a slightly different tone for this body covering, this tight armor, I don't know if it's armor, if our Vindilorian is just super jacked up, has been hitting the gym, working those abs, might just be skin tight apparel, I don't know. But if you wanted to paint this up in any other color, you could. You could paint it in red, you could paint it in a brownish gray, whatever you want. This is your model. If you have it at home, nobody's going to tell you how to paint it. I'm just going to show you how I'm painting it the best way I can to replicate the artwork that I found online for the Mandalorian. Just go ahead and finish applying this first highlight. Again, this is kind of a guide to help you find the areas where you will apply your final brightest highlight. When you're done, I've got a little bit of that pure Filthy Cape on my palette. A wet palette's great for this. And I'm just going to apply this very thin down, and I'm going to pick out those raised areas on the model. Just like that. All right, now I think all of his undersuit is finished. Before I move on to the rest of the model, I've got a little bit of demonic yellow on my palette here. And if you notice in any of the reference photos, the tips of his fingers, his gloves that he's wearing, are actually yellow. So I want to go ahead and get that now. So I'm just applying a little bit of this to the four fingers of the model right there. And this model does have a cool little lens right up in here. And I'm going to go ahead and just base that in with a little bit of our demonic yellow. Then I'll just take just a little dab of moon dust and apply a quick little highlight right to the tips of the fingers right there. And I'm going to dot the upper right portion of the lens with that moon dust. There you go, just like that. Then with a little bit of our mid-brown Quickshade wash, I'm just gonna highlight the fingers, or shade the fingers, excuse me. We already highlighted them. I know it's kind of backwards way of doing it, but by applying the highlight first on these tiny areas, it can sometimes save you a little bit of time and get a better effect. Now I'm just gonna apply this mid-brown to the inside of the lens like so. You don't want it to be too drastic, just enough, there you go, to define that area. Now if you want to come back later, you can add another dot of that moon dust or even some white to really give that lens a nice glowing reflective appearance. Next, we're going to begin basing in all of the leather and brown areas on the model, like the straps that he's wearing, his belt, and the pouches. So for this, I'm going right to Dirt Spatter from the Warpaints range, and I'm very carefully ensuring that I don't obscure any of the detail on the model with some thin down Dirt Spatter, and also very careful that I don't paint over any of our hard work that we've previously painted. Just going to apply this to all of the areas that we want to have that leathery brown, like the pouches here on his waist. And you'll find that he has some straps going around the armor like here. Just very carefully make sure you paint inside those buckles. And of course the strap going around attaching his rifle to his back. I took a bit of time as I went over and across the model. I found all kinds of straps and details on the model that I didn't initially see, so I went and made sure that I found all of them and picked them out in Dirt Spatter. Now I'm just taking a little bit of our Quickshade Strong Tone. This is probably our most popular wash because it is one of our most versatile washes. It is a very dark, rich brown tone, and I'm just going to apply this all over the areas that I previously painted in our Dirt Spatter. just to wash it down and provide us some guidance here on where we're going to apply the highlights, add some depth, contrast, and shading. Let's go ahead across all of the areas on the model that you painted in your dirt spatter, Warpaints dirt spatter, and give it a nice coat of our Quickshade strong tone. Just as usual, we've allowed the wash some time to dry, and I'm going back to our original base tone, this time dirt spatter, and I'm just going to pick out the highlights, and allow the recesses to stay darker thanks to our application of Quickshade strong tone. Now here on this belt, what I'm going to do is, as opposed to just basing it in, I'm going to pick the higher points and in a perpendicular line to the way that the strap is running, I'm going to just add some little hatch marks like so. So I'm just drawing some lines, giving some texture to the model, allowing some of that darker washed areas to still exist on the model. And this is just going to add some nice, almost realistic leather texture to the model. On other areas like here on this pouch, I'm just going to apply a slight edge highlight and pick out some of the areas while leaving the wash in the recesses to provide some shading for us. I've got a little bit of fur brown on my palette, and now I'm just going to pick out the most extreme areas and edges on all of the brown and leather bits on the model. Just like so, very carefully. I have thinned down my paint using some clean water, and this is just going to allow me more control as I'm applying these highlights to all the leather bits on the model. Areas like here on the edge of this belt, you can just trace with the very tip and edge of your brush across this hard edge. You want to be very, very careful. Again, thin down paints will help you here. I'm going to just turn the model upside down to make it a little bit easier to catch the bottom side here. And you can just see with the tip of my brush, I'm just tracing along that edge very gently to pull out that hard edge. So repeat this across all the model. If you want to, on areas like the belt, you could just take, I'm going to add a little bit of fresh paint to the brush. You can just add some scratches across the model sporadically to give it a nice worn leather feel. With that first highlight of fur brown applied, I've got just a little bit of tan flesh here, and I'm going to apply this just to the most extreme edges and highlights, like here, just the tops and bottoms of these straps. And again, here on the belt loop. And you'll want to go and find some of those areas that you added for scratch marks and just go ahead and reinforce them a little bit with this tan flesh, just like so. And of course, just a standard edge highlight, picking out the corners, like here on the pouch, just like that. Let's go ahead and go across all of the areas on the model that you previously highlighted in fur brown with your tan flesh and really pick out those details on the model. Now ready to begin painting all of the armor. And before I do that, I do just want to go clean it up, and I want to show off here just how well our 100% color matching system works. I'm taking some of the skeleton bone. Remember that we used this color primer skeleton bone to prime and base coat the model. And now I'm just going back over the areas where I kind of painted outside the lines a little bit, and I'm just taking some of our Warpaints skeleton bone and just going back over that, very thin paint. And what this does is it just gives us a nice, clean, smooth surface to work from. It also helps us to just pick out the areas that we know we need to paint and highlight, because as you begin adding several different layers on, sometimes the detail can get just a bit lost when you start adding in multiple colors around and across the model. So just go ahead, take your time here, and begin applying that skeleton bone, just one thin coat. You're not looking for perfect coverage here, but just one thin, smooth coat on all the areas that you know are going to be painted in metallics, just to give you a good reference point before you begin applying those metallic colors to the model. All right, with that step complete, we're going to begin painting in all of the metallic areas on the model. Now, it's important to remember that a lot of these effects you can pull off at home using a standard silver metallic or gold metallic paint from our Warpaints Metallics range, and just use our colored quick shades over top. For example, you might want to use mid-brown over top of the bone colors, or our red tone over top of the red colors. There's actually a pretty handy tutorial for how to do this if you go to www.thearmypainter.com and click on the download links up in the upper portion of the website there. But for now, we're going to take a look at these new prototype metallics. So I've added a little bit of a new prototype paint that you should be seeing on the market real soon. It's from a new metallics paint set that we're working on. So we're going to pick the areas on the model that we want to have in this metallic bone color. And I'm just applying a very thin application to those areas. Now, it does look a little too pearly to me. That's okay though. We are going to wash it down a bit and darken it down. So find those areas on the model that you know you want to have this pearly bone color, and just add a very smooth, light base coat to the model. We're going to be moving on to some of the insignia on the paneling. I guess you could just call this the paneling on the shoulder pad. And for this, we're using another one of these prototype products. This is a nice turquoise metallic that right now we're calling azure blue. And I'm just very carefully, very thin down application, going to apply this to the top of the shoulder pad, the upper third of the shoulder pad, just like the Mandalorian in the famous series. Now I'm applying a new paint that we're calling Gemstone, and we're just going to apply this to all of the areas on the model that we want to have feature that red metallic paint. I have thinned this down quite a bit, but we're getting very, very good coverage, especially for a red tone paint. Just go ahead and very simply, very carefully apply a nice thin coat. If you have to, go back and apply a second coat. So go ahead and apply this to all of the areas on the model that you want to have in this red metallic fashion. Take your time. Just be very careful because you don't want to undo any of the work that you've already done. Now, because we're going to be applying a wash using the same coat to all of the armor so far as we are on the base, you see these skulls on the base, I'm just going to go ahead and apply a base tone to the base itself. And for this, I'm using the very aptly named Desert Yellow. I'm just going to apply this in two thin coats all around the base of the model, being careful not to get this paint onto the boots, which I previously painted in that skeleton bone mixture. Oop, you see I did it right there. This is why we do this before the wash stage, because I can just go back and with the paint that I have on my palette, I can fix that and tidy that up. It's a lot harder to do after you've applied a wash. No worries though, just keep going on around the rest of the base and apply, make sure you work this desert yellow into all of the nooks and crannies. All right, now it's time to wash all of the red armor, the bone armor, and the base of the model. Now I've taken a bit of our Quickshade Strong Tone and I've thinned it down with a bit of our Quickshade Wash Mixing Medium. That's because I don't want it to be too drastic on some of these bonier areas, like this bone armor here and the bone armor on the shoulder. So we're just going to apply this very simply all over, allow it to work its way into the recesses. And if you want to darken it down a bit more, you can apply a second coat to all of the areas that you wish to be a bit darker. So we're just going to apply this and allow it to work its way into the recesses, pick out those details as you can see it doing right on its own. This wash is almost like magic in a bottle. It really brings out the depth and detail on the models very simply and effectively. All right, before we move on to the final highlighting and metallic stages of the model, I do just want to finish the base because that way we can tidy up any mistakes that we make later on. Hopefully we won't make too many, but having the base finished really helps, and it motivates me. A lot of times when I'm working on big projects where I'm painting a whole army, what I like to do is I'll take a break before I get into the fine detail work or highlighting, and I'll base the model up until before I will put tufts on. And the reason I do this is it just adds some extra motivation and lets me know that there's a good stopping point for me when I'm moving on to other areas of the project. So the final step, once I've painted everything, is adding the tufts. That's my completion point, my finish line. And then next we're going to just add a light dry brush of skeleton bone, this time flicking it all the way across the tops, and make sure you get the skulls too. That's what we base tone the skulls with, and we will come back and add another highlight. This is going to give a nice arid desert look to this base. We're going to move on to highlighting and reestablishing the base tones on all of the armor. I've got a little bit of that metallic turquoise here, and I'm just going to apply that to the outer ridges on the shoulder pad, like so. Maybe fill in very carefully some of the interior bits here in between these ridges, but you do want to ensure that that wash sits in the recesses. Go back to our gemstone red, and for this we're just going to pick out some of the areas on the model, like here, these edges of the shoulder pad. Just very simply, we want that wash to sit in the recesses because it adds a nice realistic shading effect, but we do want to bring this just slightly closer back to red. So I'm just taking a little bit of that gemstone paint. Again, this is a new prototype that we're working on. We hope to finalize this set and have it to market very soon, but we were so excited about it. We wanted to use it in some of the tutorials that we're working on, just so you guys can get a look behind the scenes as to how we develop products. We try things, we test them out, we share them around the office, we ask for feedback, and in many cases we talk with some of our favorite pro painters out there and content creators to get their feedback as well. So very carefully just finding the hard edges and reapplying that gemstone paint to them, like here on the tops of this little ankle piece to the boot, and of course the outermost ridges of this thigh pad here. And then we will apply the same highlights to all of the bony armor on the model, again using that mix of skeleton bone and our white dragon or fairy dust paint. We're not sure what we're going to call it yet. Why don't you tell us what you like best in the comments, and we will take that into consideration. Moving on again to another one of our new metallic paints. This one we're calling Night Scales. It's a dark bluish black metallic, and I'm just going to apply this to the gun casing on his pistol here. I'm also going to catch these little pieces of metal on the interior of the helmet. It's okay if you get a little bit on the outside. We are going to come back and apply a base tone of a different metallic color there. We also want to apply this all over the main body of his large rifle. Before I paint in the rest of the metallics, it wouldn't be the Mandalorian, or in this case the Vindilorian, without that classic black visor, the inner side of the visor. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to apply that matte black to the inside first, just so I don't. It's a lot easier to do this now and then paint the metallics on the outside as opposed to trying to get this right the first time. You see I'm just being very loose, making sure that I get that on the inside. And I'll come back and I'll apply the metallic around those areas next. All right, so I've applied some gunmetal, some plate mail metal, and some shining silver to my palette. Now with the gunmetal, I'm just going to go and pick out some of the areas that I want to be a slightly darker metallic. I'm just going to do these skulls on the model here, and some of these belt buckles like you have here, and some of the bullets, the shells that he has on the model, just like that. I'll also pick out some of the details on the weapons. I'm going to leave most of them that base color bluish black tone because, you know, in referencing some of the Star Wars artwork, they didn't have a lot of variations to the weapons. All of them were very, very simple. So I'm going to kind of keep the same principle here as I paint up this model. And then with plate mail metal, I'm going to paint in the helmet. You see, I'm just leaving the black that I already painted into the lens of the helmet, the visor there. Just leaving that put. It's much easier to paint it this way than try and get that black paint in there after you've already painted the rest of the helmet. I'm going to apply Quickshade Dark Tone to all of the areas that we previously painted in our silver and bluish metallics. And I'm just going to very carefully apply that. Allow it to run its way into the recesses and tie these different metallic tones together. Now when you're applying this to the helmet of our Vindilorian, what I'd like you to do is start from the top down and pull that wash down because we don't want it to pull up at the top. Let gravity do its work here. Start from the top down, like so. And just pull that wash down into the recesses. Gravity is your friend here. So for all of the bigger metallic areas, we're just going to apply a very light dry brush of plate mail silver to those areas. So just very gently flicking some of that plate mail silver across. Give it a nice worn metallic look. Then on the more detailed areas like these shells that he has packaged away, we're just going to add a traditional highlight with plate mail silver on the skull. We'll add another just traditional highlight. Just very, very simple here. And now for the helmet, we're going to take shining silver. I'm just going to very carefully apply this to the center and most raised areas. Really make that helmet shine. All right, and for the final stages of this tutorial, we are going to add some of the weathering that we promised to you. I'm just taking some matte black war paint, and I'm applying this into the bullet holes. I've thinned it down, so I've got some nice control, and the cracks, the apparent cracks on the armor. Just like so. When you're done with that, find your favorite metallic paint. I think I'm going to just use a little bit of the shining silver that we just used on the helmet. And I'm just going to add some rough points on the armor, like so. Being somewhat sporadic and only focusing on the edges of the model. I'm taking the shining silver and just adding a little bit of chipping. Now, some people like to do this with a sponge, and more power to them if they do. But I just like to use detail or a character brush and just apply these kind of naturally and sporadically around the model. I'm really happy with how this Vindilorian model turned out, and you can replicate these same techniques at home using our range of war paints, metallics, and of course these new metallics that we'll be bringing to market real soon. Well, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial as much as I enjoyed painting up this Vindilorian model for you today. Remember that you can find all of the Army Painter products from your friendly local game store, from your favorite online retailer such as Amazon, or at www.thearmypainter.com. Remember, the magic in miniature painting is that it can be as simple or as challenging as you'd like it to be, but with the right techniques, you're sure to achieve some great results. We'll see you next time.